work at the school level, at the district level, and now at the state level. And she has a wealth of knowledge that she's going to bring us. And we're so excited to hear from her today. And at this time, I'm going to hand it over. All right. If you'll
Thank
just let me
you.
know.
And I'm so excited to be with you all this afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and ask if we can go to the next slide to start us off. I know I'm talking about that community engagement and input today. So sometimes it helps to start with, I know a lot of you are representing leadership teams. And so at the next slide, if you don't mind progressing forward, um, what are our objectives for today? And we are talking about that leadership team that guides the MTSS process at our school level or our district level, and specifically the leadership team's role in being purposeful about obtaining that input. So as we go through some of the content we use, I'm going to go through in that lens of how we support and train our own teams. And then I will try, I usually can't help myself, but jump in from when I was on teams in schools, what this looked like. And then mainly try to get to the benefits. Why do we want to do this? And why do we need to engage members? Why can't we just roll out our plan of what this is going to look like without that engagement present? And I will do my best to give some quick strategies for what this has looked like. We'll give some examples, and then we'll give you one of teaming activities that we use in our Florida work to help teams kind of plan this out. I'm talking from the team level today, but I'll also try to give some examples of when we integrate that in each piece of the MTSS behavior framework that we're trying to implement. So that's my goals and objectives for getting to share with you today. If you have questions throughout, please chat them in the chat box. I will try to address them as we go, and then we'll give some time, I know, after I'm done to address those as well. So I just mentioned it often helps to start with that grounding of what's the purpose of this leadership team in MTSS for behavior. And this is the slide we use in that I'm sure is going to look very familiar to you, that we start with what's the reason, the vision, the mission, why are we doing this? And from that starting point, we want to engage all the partners or stakeholders in terms of our school community and who represents that school community. And in a second, we'll unpack that because sometimes we even have trouble identifying who are those partners that we really want to make sure we're engaging. The other role there is we're constantly trying to design what this is going to look like, deliver it, monitor or evaluate it, and see how it's going for us. And part of doing that work is that we're using the engagement of those partners in the designing and what we deliver and how we deliver it. And then also that we're using their voice and engagement and how's it working for us, or that evaluation piece. The other role of the team is we're constantly looking at data. We do our best to do that disaggregated data so we can look across not just everyone, but those disaggregated subgroups. We try to look at impacts in discipline and overall climate for our buildings and districts, and other behavioral sources that we may have of engagement, like things like attendance or early warning indicators. We look at lots of different data as we're doing some of these roles as a team. Some of the ways that we use engagement as we talk through it today is that's another source of data we want to make sure we're making this regular routine to gather. But because in the past of our work, we've struggled with this a little bit, you see the box on that last role of the team. We really try to drive home in our training and our supportive teams that this is a key role. We don't want to, while it's simple to think of engagement as just another source of data, we want it to be real purposeful. So we want to make sure as a team, we're making regular routines where we're engaging those stakeholders and partners to make sure that what we're implementing, or in that first bullet or second bullet, excuse me, designing and delivering, that it's relevant to everyone that we serve in our campuses and in our districts. It's also going to help us make it really practical and relevant to those that we serve from different perspectives than only ours that sometimes are present in different leadership teams. So as you think of your districts and your buildings that you represent today, think of what you would have in representation of all backgrounds. Who's represented on your campus, and your students, and your families, and your staff? Because as we start through some of these ideas, that's what we want to keep an idea on, our pulse on, is who are those stakeholders at your local level that need to be a part of this role that's emphasized on this slide. So part of being, to our little circle there in the blue, part of being a higher functioning team and having better implementation is that we're serving all the roles of these bullets. And the box on the one is making that really explicit piece that our role as a leadership team is constantly getting that stakeholder feedback. And I want you to keep the term bidirectional in your head today, because we tend to be pretty good at it as educators, to put some information out there, but we want to keep the idea of not just putting out information out there, but getting some information back from these stakeholders as we go. So then thank you. If we can go to the next slide for me. Okay, so when we're saying this is, we're going to focus on this explicit piece of the team and how we get community or stakeholder or partner voice. Why do we want to do it? What are the benefits of it? And I mentioned one that you'll hear me kind of say repetitively. It's going to help keep what we're implementing on our campuses and our districts relevant to those that we serve and who are a part of that campus family. Yes, oh, love it. As someone just chatted in, buy-in. If you include their voice, you're going to have better buy-in to what you're designing and implementing, right? It's also going to keep it really relevant to that context. If the students we serve, if they have a voice, it's going to keep it relevant to the students. Same with families. They're going to be able to give us their perspective if we get that feedback or engagement to help make it fit them the best that we possibly can. And then I mentioned that role in the last slide about we're going to constantly monitor what we're delivering and evaluating how's it working for us. Keeping that stakeholder voice is going to help us keep adapting. What do we need to change up based on how it's working for us? So if we, oh, thank you so much. I was just looking for my timer. My timer's a great accommodation for me. If you don't know me, I need that little prompt. When you're planning, when you're starting to say, what are we going to deliver in our campus? You want to identify, and I always think of it like you were just talking about teaching matrix. You want to identify those partnerships that you're going to establish and how you're going to have those regular routines to gather feedback. So we'll give some examples of that, but some of our teams will do things like we're going to send out regular newsletters for awareness, and then we're going to ask for regular surveys to get feedback, for example, for that ongoing partnership. Keep in mind that third point, we want this to be joint verse. So if we're ever asking for feedback, we want to make sure we're sharing how we're going to use it. That helps the piece of we want feedback. We want that value of the other's perspectives. Something like a teaching matrix or a reward system, we can plan one as a leadership team, but if we don't ask how it's working for those that are delivering it, like our staff stakeholders, or for our families that are trying to use it at home, it's not really valuing their perspective and use of it. So as we think through how we gather this stakeholder voice, that's what we're aiming for there. And then a couple of you just hit on it in buy-in in the chat box, that ownership. We want them to feel like they're designing the system with us. They're giving feedback to it. We adjust what we're doing to get more engagement from them, and have their active support on it as we go. And not just that initial implementation, but as we go. We're always looking for new ideas because that's the idea of getting different perspectives around something that we're implementing. It's going to help us problem solve how to do something differently that maybe would work better for those that we're serving and our students and our families or our staff. One thing we tried to do in our Florida work is gather staff feedback right up front when we're planning what our MTSS for behavior elements are going to look like, what we teach, how we teach it, how we reward it. We try to get that viewpoint or perspective first so that we can use that in planning the system versus us designing it and rolling it out and then getting that feedback. And then the whole idea of this or the benefit is we're trying to improve student outcomes for all students across subgroups, and also then increase what we're doing with fidelity. We're doing it better. And then keep that last bullet in mind as we go, positive relationships. So I've mentioned a couple times already in this couple of minutes about if we're doing this well, if we're really including stakeholder voice, it's very clear that we value that voice and we value that feedback, and that we're listening to it. So for example, if we give a survey, we're showing how we use that feedback. If we are delivering rewards, it's not just rewarding students, it's rewarding staff and it's rewarding families. If we find a problem, like maybe there's a discipline trend we're unhappy with, we're going to use their feedback to then use that to develop a positive approach to that and a relationship in solving that problem together versus just us designing a solution without that feedback. So here's the what and why of why we want to do it. I'm sure you kind of know that it seems like a good idea. Those are our bullets that we try to drive home of why we want to do this. Why is it important? It's going to help us do it better, have those outcomes, build positive relationships. And if you don't mind just scooting for me one more. There we go. So I mentioned it's helped in our teams. And as you think of your own teams, really taking some time to think through who are these stakeholder or partner groups. Some of them jump out right away. Staff is usually easy. We think of staff right off the bat. If staff's going to be implementing what we design in this MTSS, then we want to make sure we get their feedback in that. But we don't want to forget others that are crucial. And I'm going to highlight at the top there families. Families is someone we tend to forget that bi-directional part for. We know we want to share stuff with them, but how do we come up with methods that we're not just sharing out what it's going to look like, but we gather some information? I'll give you a couple examples of that in just a minute. But I mentioned already these groups that you see around. Who are your stakeholders or partners as you think through that? So in Florida, we tend to unpack this with our teams right off the bat, and I would encourage you to do that, thinking through who are your key partners, because that's where you're going to develop your teaming routines, where you want to make sure I'm gathering regular feedback from them as we go and using that in design of what I'm implementing and monitoring how it's going. So I mentioned staff's pretty easy. Students are very good at giving us solutions to problems and giving us good feedback to help make this better. Again, just building in regular routines. How are we going to ask students for their voice back? How are we going to gather that? And what's a developmentally appropriate way to do that, depending on your age group or who you serve? Maybe if, for example, when I'm talking about students with disabilities versus non, I'm going to differentiate how I ask for that feedback. So keeping those voice of all those, the other bubbles that you see around the circle, don't forget about the people that aren't always in your building or in your district leadership teams, your community partners that may come in and out, your itinerant staff. Sometimes your student support specialists are coming in and out of a building. They're still a crucial partner or stakeholder in this work, but they may not be always present, so they're easy to forget about sometimes in how we want to engage them. So if you think about that's who your stakeholder groups are, again, I'm going to encourage you to think about that as I'm talking through this. Who are those crucial partners that you want to make sure you get voice from? And we've kind of highlighted some that we think are truly important. If I had to summarize, families, students, staff being those big pocket areas that we're looking for to make this really effective. And if we don't mind scooting forward for me one more time. So I said we give some examples. Like one of the things we find is even though everyone gets this idea of engagement and we want this to happen, what does it look like? So we're going to give you a couple examples, and then I encourage you to think through some that you have. Thank you for that. I'm just popping out. You can actually pop all of them up there if you want, just to help with the animation. So let's just start at the top. On the top is, remember I asked you to kind of keep that idea of bi-directional feedback. We don't want to just share out information. We're pretty good at that usually as educators, but we want to ask for some feedback. So right there on the top, there's an example of a school that was sharing out one of their practices, what they were going to deliver. And it was a specific one we use when we're trying to build relationships called effective statements in their design of their multi-tiered system for behavior. So when they asked for it on social media, because social media is gaining traction as one of those methods that's pretty effective, they didn't just share the practice. They did in that top section that you see as an example to the right. But then they asked for, how's it going for you at home? Are you trying this at home? How's that been working for you with your home setting and trying it out? And that second one, it's a little bit blurry there for you, but it's a parent responding. How did that work for me? And they were mentioning it in the setting of cleaning your room, which I actually at home use this with my teenager a lot. When I label the emotion, I tell them it's making me frustrated and this is why I'm asking for this thing. It helps promote, and she's saying the same thing as a family member, that when they used it at home to clean their room, it worked really well for her. So they didn't just share the practice, they shared the practice and then asked for feedback. And then as far as another example, gathering student feedback, especially if it's older populations, it doesn't have to be something where we just pull those students together and we just ask them. It can be things like gathering through a QR code in student feedback. Families, QR codes work really well for families. If you haven't used QR codes before, they're like the way of the future. Everyone's got a digital device, so they can use that little QR code, like the example you see on the right at the bottom, and they can give that quick feedback of whatever the ask is. We gave the example of a high school student where we're just asking for things like dress code. If you see a lot of discipline, and I don't know if you do in your schools, but we tend to see, especially in our secondary campuses, that dress code is driving a lot of our referrals. If we ask students why that is, A lot of times they'll tell you, well, I'm unclear on what length of shorts I can have. I'm unclear on if I can wear this type of shirt or this type of shirt. Is this one okay or not? But getting the student perspective on that is going to help us solve the discipline. The other thing we use this example for is just, again, the method there. How we ask can promote safety in them responding. Oh, yes, Karen, I just saw your chat and then I saw someone's right before that too. You want to, as we put some of these examples out there, there's not one-stop shop here. You want to think of multiple examples and then using it, when I said regular routines, using it throughout the year. So once our schools, some of the examples you see here, they identify a method like social media. We're going to use social media. You can use it throughout the year to solve one or two things and focus on one at a time. You can also adjust the different methods because we want to use different communication formats that are preferred by the group we're trying to engage. So for example, I'm noticing with a high school student at home, social media is big. Am I good at always checking social media as a parent? No. So I had to get better at that. And I love that his high school has shifted to now do emails in addition to social media because I guess I'm old school like that. I like the email method of mentality, whereas the social media gets a lot of students. Students like that method, and some families that works best for them. But the QR code, going back to that example, really popular, easy, and students always have their digital devices that they can use a QR code for. You could use it though, to everyone's point in the chat box, for multiple things. We just gave an example there of a particular discipline problem that may be something that you want to address or reduce. Some other issues that you see there with students and middle school students in particular, secondary students, how they want to deliver something. So we have a district that I actually get to work with up here in Northeast Florida that does a student conference, and it's student led. So the students get to come up with how they're going to deliver that conference to make it relevant to kids and make it engaging. The other example I would link that to for all of you is when you're rolling out how I'm going to teach behavioral expectations and rules and routines. Our students are really good at things like videos or making them really engaging, much better than sometimes I know we are as adults, and making things that are engaging in instruction or relevant as instructional examples. Oh, yes. So I'm glad to see that from Moultrie. They like that idea as well. I always encourage my teams, use your students. They're really good at that. And then the students are great at making videos that use nice and relevant examples to their current situation. So use students that way. We gave you the one on the mental health conference. All right, so families. I love, and this is from a different school, but I'll give you an example with that one. If you're experiencing discipline data that you're not liking, for example, an increase in fights or an increase in maybe verbal aggression or language that you don't like, sharing that out in newsletters and asking for feedback on how to improve those behaviors and how you're going to address that, or just sharing with families, we need your help talking about being responsible and being respectful. What are some ways that you guys talk about that at home? It's a way to engage those families in something you're experiencing in the school setting, but get their feedback on how they reteach those behaviors, in addition to sharing, just like the top example, how we're going to address that on a campus. Builds awareness of that, lets you talk with your students about it. We see lots of examples like that. And then the last one is we at one point in our schools, we see a lot of students sometimes want to make a point or make a statement and they'll choose to do it in an unsafe way. And at the time of this example, they were doing things like walking out during unsafe times. If we want them to have a voice, we can let them suggest ways that they can solve that solution. We can build more opportunities in our school where they can have that voice or that change. So I give these because it is very common when we talk about this, we get it, we want to engage partners to like, what could this look like? So we like to give a couple, and you hear me kind of elaborate on even the ones on the screen because this has looked many different ways. But just thinking of, in these examples on the slide, multiple ways you could do this, how you could use it throughout the year as you're designing and delivering and evaluating. And then changing up your methods, social media, QR codes, email, newsletters, those kind of things. So if you don't mind switching for me one more. All right, so now that we gave some examples, we know why it's important and some examples that we want to do. How do we do this? And I couldn't help myself but mention the first bullet because it's really important. If we're going to engage a group, and especially families on this slide, how can we do it in a way that's preferred? And I gave my own personal example of having a high schooler and learning I got to be better at social media because that's their primary outlet, but it's not my preferred one. That's a method. You can also think about this by what are the preferred language formats of your school? Do we have a primarily Spanish speaking population versus English as a dominant language? Oh, and there goes my time. I'm so sorry. I didn't do a good job with that, but thinking through how you communicate with the methods and the strategies that you use will help you do this more successfully.
You can finish talking through this slide. Absolutely.
Okay, sure. And I already hit on it a little bit in the last one, but just keeping an eye on a lot of you said the multiple methods that you ask for some feedback on that. And if you don't mind, I'll wrap up. There's 2 slides. If you'll just switch for me to the activity, we left you with it. One more for me. We left you with 2 examples, and Karen has those. I know we were going to share them with you as a group. We wanted not just that initial, but how you ask for families and stakeholders as you go through your design. We like to highlight the personal matrix activity, and we gave this to you. That's a great way to engage with families of how it looks across settings. And we gave you that activity. And the last one we gave you was a team activity. And that's the last slide on there. The teaming activity, we like to have you think through that idea of communication styles. So we gave you the questions that we use with teams, and then also on the right, we gave you a little communication preference survey that we use. So Karen, I know had handed those off to all of you. And I apologize for going a little bit over my time there, but we wanted to emphasize if this is what you want to engage in and think about those things of communication style, those are some resources that we've used in our teams that really help them think through this across their design. And then I will stop because I'm already over my time. Crystal, I apologize.
This is good stuff. So if you've got more to say, please definitely share. I will let everyone know that in the document, I think Karen just put it in the chat. We have linked a folder that has each of the resources she just talked about in it already. So when you open that folder, you will find all the resources she just talked about here. At this time, we will stop recording and give you times if you have questions. Please